All of New York Harbor used to be totally full of oyster reefs. They were harvested sustainably by the Lenape, who lived here before Europeans for tens of thousands of years. And then when Europeans arrived, in about 100 years, they had harvested all the oyster from New York Harbor. So by the late 1700s, there wasn't really any wild oyster population left. Oyster reefs are a component of proactive planning for climate change and rising water levels, and can play a role in protecting the land in New York City from intense storms. You can think of oysters just like the trees in a forest. They filter the water, provide food and habitat for other animals. They stabilize the bottom, protect the shore. So by restoring oyster reefs, you build back that ecosystem. New York Harbor right now is essentially a 200,000 acre forest that has no trees in it. If that was the case, we'd all be running to plant trees. I'm Pete Malinowski, Executive Director of Billion Oyster Project. My parents started the Fish on Oyster Farm about 40 years ago, and I grew up working on the farm with my siblings, my parents. Growing up, I was not a very successful student, but I loved learning about oysters and the natural environment. And so I moved to New York after college, and I met the founder of New York Harbor School, Murray Fisher. Billion Oyster Project grew out of the Harbor School. Rather than learning in a classroom, being out on New York Harbor, experiencing the natural world, practicing those skills. We think of Billion Oyster Project as having three big departments. Restoration, where we put the oysters in the water. Education, when we work directly in schools. And community engagement, where we get New Yorkers from all walks of life to come and help us. The restoration work, putting oysters in the water, involves three components. Shell collection from restaurants, fabrication, where we build all of our reef structures, and then the aquaculture components, actually setting live oysters on those structures and then putting them in the water. We rely a lot on volunteers to process our shell and to build our reef structures. Through the work of volunteers, students at Harbor School, we're able to build several hundred to 1,000 of those every year, which end up going down at our reef sites. Our partnership with Harbor School is fundamental to Billion Oyster Project. One of the lessons I took away from my time teaching that we've incorporated into Billion Oyster Project is this concept of asking students to join us in solving challenging problems. That's motivating for a lot of students. It's motivating for all of us. If we want there to be any hope for the planet, young people have to be involved in the solution. And not just young people who have access to nature because of where they grew up, or young people who know how to swim because their parents can afford swimming lessons, but all young people, right? We have to find a way to leverage the diversity of talents and backgrounds that you have in a place like New York City to solve the problems of the future. And watching that same process happen for students all over New York City, get to the point where they identify the harbor as theirs and their responsibility and their resource and privilege to have the harbor, because there's nowhere that work is more important than in cities. You're not trying to save yourself, you're trying to save something that you love.